The story of Yanis has always been marked by unexpected turns, but the recent upheaval surrounding the convent and Château de la Basse feels far more significant than ordinary online drama. For a community accustomed to the comforting rhythm of restoration updates, animal rescues, and the eccentric charm of this corner of French YouTube, the fallout landed like a thunderclap. What once appeared to be a stable world built on friendship, creativity, and shared ambition now seems fractured, leaving a once wholesome narrative in pieces. At the center of this storm is Yanis, a figure who, until recently, represented one of the clearest success stories within the Château universe. Unlike the typical influencer driven by self-promotion and spectacle, Yanis built his reputation through quiet reliability and genuine hard work. He first entered the orbit of Billy Petherick and Gwen through their extended creative circle, not as a restorer or content creator, but simply as a bartender willing to help wherever he was needed. That humility immediately resonated with viewers. Yanis became known as the dependable presence who never avoided the difficult work, whether caring for animals, maintaining the grounds, or taking on physically exhausting restoration tasks. His appeal was never based on exaggerated charisma or manufactured online theatrics. Instead, audiences were drawn to his sincerity. He came across as someone deeply grateful for the opportunity and determined to earn his place through effort, rather than attention. Over time, Yanis evolved from a background helper into one of the most essential figures at the convent and Château de la Basse. Recognizing both his dedication and capability, Billy Petherick and Gwendoline eventually brought him on full-time as caretaker of the property. That decision changed everything. A new protagonist had entered the story. Yanis moved from the edges of the Château world to the very center of its restoration machine, transforming from background helper into one of its most compelling figures. What made his rise so captivating was the fact that audiences were not simply watching a finished expert, they were watching someone learn in real time. There is a unique kind of magic in seeing a person slowly master a craft, and Yanis became the stand-in for every viewer who had ever fantasized about abandoning ordinary life for physical work, restoration projects, and the romance of rebuilding something meaningful with their own hands. But that rapid ascent also planted the seeds of the fracture now impossible to ignore. As Yanis's popularity grew, the boundaries between employee, friend, collaborator, and independent creator began to blur. The very qualities that made him beloved by audiences, his confidence, growth, and increasing independence, eventually became points of tension within a professional circle that was never fully prepared for the helper to become a leading figure in his own right. The emotional investment viewers placed in Yanis cannot be overstated. There is something deeply satisfying, almost instinctively human, about watching someone evolve from an uncertain apprentice into a capable craftsman. And Yanis, affectionately known by many viewers as Giannis, fit that narrative perfectly. While many restoration channels lean heavily into romanticized visuals and slow-living aesthetics, Yanis' story felt grounded in the reality of the grind. His journey was built not on polished perfection, but on visible effort. Viewers watched him shadow experienced craftsmen like Simon, absorbing techniques, making mistakes, learning through repetition, and gradually growing more skilled with every project. That authenticity became his brand. His appeal wasn't rooted in curated luxury or cinematic escapism. It came from the dust-covered clothes, the exhausting labor, the trial and error, and the unmistakable sense that nothing was being handed to him. In many ways, Yanis became the working backbone of the Château narrative, the tangible, hard-working counterweight to the whimsical fantasy that surrounded Château life online. Then came the turning point. In early 2025, Billy Petherick handed Yanis a camera. What initially appeared to be a generous gesture, a way to help a friend explore his own creative path, would ultimately reshape the dynamics of the entire Château ecosystem. With the launch of his solo channel, Yanis the Homewrecker, he stepped fully out of the background and into the spotlight. The channel's success was immediate, but it wasn't driven solely by his existing popularity. What made it resonate was its intimacy. The content felt personal, grounded, and refreshingly unpolished. Alongside renovation projects, viewers were drawn into quieter moments, caring for animals, reflecting on daily struggles, navigating uncertainty, and slowly building a life through persistence and hard work. That emotional accessibility transformed viewers into fiercely loyal supporters. Yanis became more than just another creator in the Château universe. He became a symbol of upward momentum, the ordinary man steadily carving out a future through grit, humility, and determination. And once audiences began to see him as the hero of his own story, the balance within the old system could never remain the same. The sudden silence of 2026 hit the community with the force of a shockwave. For years, viewers had grown accustomed to the comforting rhythm of Château life, restoration updates, familiar faces, chaotic projects, shared meals, and the slow but steady progression of impossible dreams becoming reality. That sense of continuity made the events of early 2026 feel deeply unsettling, not because of what was announced, but because of what suddenly disappeared. The disappearance of Billy Petherick and his family from the content was impossible to ignore. Once central pillars of the convent and château de la Basse narrative, they seemed to vanish almost overnight. There was no dramatic statement, no public explanation, no neatly packaged farewell, but in an ecosystem where every project, relationship, and renovation had become deeply interconnected, silence itself became an announcement. Fans noticed the absence immediately. When recurring faces stop recurring, curiosity quickly turns into concern, and as weeks passed without clarification, speculation flooded the vacuum. What initially seemed like temporary distance slowly began to resemble something far more serious, a fundamental fracture at the heart of the chateau world. Rumors of a split between Billy and Gwen began circulating throughout the community, suggesting that the very foundation of the restoration enterprise was being dismantled in real time. What had once been a wholesome story about restoration, friendship, and creative collaboration was suddenly transforming into something far more complicated. The uplifting narrative of an apprentice finding his place had evolved into a tense and emotionally charged conflict where personal relationships and professional ambitions were colliding publicly. The power dynamics shifted permanently the moment the personal became inseparable from the professional. As the legal owner of the property and one of the primary financial backers behind the projects, Gwendoline Musil was never simply another personality within the chateau ecosystem. She was a structural pillar of it. Any separation between her and Billy was not merely emotional fallout. It carried practical and financial consequences capable of reshaping the entire operation. This was no longer just about relationships. It was about ownership, authority, access, and control over the future of the projects themselves. Then came another alarming development. Yanis disappeared from YouTube entirely. At the height of the instability, his silence created an atmosphere of genuine unease among viewers. His absence felt heavier than a routine break from uploading. To many fans, it seemed as though the everyman figure they had emotionally invested in had become trapped in the middle of a conflict far larger than himself. Questions spread rapidly through the community. Had he been pushed out? Was he forced to choose sides? Was his role at the convent over? When Giannis eventually returned, he revealed a detail that instantly transformed speculation into reality. He had been locked out of the convent. That revelation changed everything. This was no longer abstract drama playing out through subtle social media behavior or missing appearances. The consequences had become physical and undeniable. The apartment renovation project viewers had watched him painstakingly build with his own hands was suddenly inaccessible to him. The work, the effort, the emotional investment, it had all been severed overnight. The lockout became the moment vague rumors hardened into concrete reality. The bridges between the former collaborators were not merely damaged. They had been barricaded. Yet what made Giannis's return so compelling was not explosive confrontation, but restraint. His comeback video was carefully measured, almost painfully controlled. He avoided direct accusations, avoided inflammatory language, and largely refused to publicly dissect the conflict. But in many ways, the things he chose not to say became louder than any direct statement could have been. One detail stood out immediately: his repeated and visible gratitude toward Gwen. Yanis openly acknowledged her support in helping him secure a new cottage renovation project on the grounds. By emphasizing her role so strongly, he quietly revealed where his future now rested. Without openly declaring loyalty, he effectively signaled which side had offered him stability when everything else collapsed. Equally revealing was the complete absence of Billy Petherick from the conversation. For a creator whose independent career had originally been launched through Billy's encouragement and support, the omission was striking. No acknowledgement. Not even a brief reference. To viewers, that silence spoke volumes. It suggested a rupture too deep for even surface-level public politeness. Without issuing an official statement, Giannis had effectively drawn a new boundary. He was no longer part of the Petherick creative orbit. He'd become an independent figure, operating under an entirely different structure, one backed directly by the property owner herself. Then came the final confirmation that convinced many viewers the fracture was permanent. Alex, the longtime cameraman and behind-the-scenes figure familiar to the audience, entered the conversation publicly through the comment section. If Giannis had communicated through implication and restraint, Alex abandoned subtlety altogether. By publicly praising Giannis as loyal and genuine, Alex did more than defend a friend. His words implicitly framed the opposing side as the source of the conflict. For many viewers, this was the moment the emotional subtext became impossible to deny. The fallout was no longer rumor. The chateau world had fractured into sides. Alex's comment changed the entire tone of the conflict. By stating publicly that Giannis did not deserve how you have been treated, he transformed what many viewers had initially interpreted as a private professional dispute into something far more personal and moral. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer centered solely around creative differences, property access, or fractured business arrangements. It became a question of loyalty, fairness, and perceived betrayal. Then came the line that cemented the new alliance. Alex's assertion that Gwen sees you for who you are carried enormous weight within the community. It was not simply encouragement. It was a public endorsement, a declaration that Yanis had found support and validation on one side of the divide while implicitly suggesting he had been denied those things on the other. In that moment, the old wholesome apprentice narrative collapsed completely. What had once felt like an uplifting story about mentorship and opportunity had evolved into something far more complicated, a survival story shaped by shifting alliances, emotional fallout, and the slow unraveling of a once tightly connected creative world. And by the end of it, the lines appeared unmistakably clear. Yanis and Gwen remained on the grounds. The Petherick era had effectively disappeared from the frame. For many viewers, Alex's public intervention acted as the final irreversible line in the sand. In the world of YouTube production, the cameraman occupies a uniquely powerful position. They are the silent observer, the unseen witness to the tensions, frustrations, awkward silences, and off-camera realities the audience never gets to see. So when someone in that position speaks publicly, viewers listen differently. Alex's defense of Giannis gave the audience permission to stop treating the situation as harmless speculation. His words suggested this was not merely an amicable separation or creative disagreement. They hinted at deeper wounds, private tensions, and a version of events in which Giannis had genuinely been treated unfairly. From that point forward, the new alignment became impossible to deny. Whether through personal conviction or simple circumstance, Giannis emerged firmly positioned alongside Gwen. His channel began pivoting away from projects associated with Billy Petherick and toward renovations directly supported by Gwen's resources and authority. That transition carried symbolic weight far beyond logistics. Giannis was no longer the apprentice sheltered within a larger family-driven narrative. He had become an independent figure navigating the aftermath of a collapse, adapting in real time while trying to preserve both his career and his public identity. For viewers, perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the fallout has been the destruction of continuity itself. Restoration content depends heavily on emotional stability. Audiences invest because they believe that no matter how difficult the work becomes, the projects will continue, the relationships will endure, and the dream will slowly move forward. That sense of permanence is part of the comfort these channels provide. But now viewers are left staring at unfinished rooms, abandoned renovations, and disrupted plans that mirror the emotional fragmentation happening behind the scenes. The physical state of the property has begun to reflect the collapse of the relationships that once sustained it. The sudden disappearance of the Petherick family has left the Chateau universe feeling fractured, unfamiliar, and emotionally disoriented for longtime followers. Predictably, the audience itself has splintered into factions. First are the Yanis loyalists, viewers who see him as a hard-working young man caught in a painful power struggle, handling the fallout with restraint, humility, and dignity. On the opposite side are the Petherick traditionalists, longtime supporters who remain loyal to Billy, either because of emotional attachment or because they believe the public still lacks critical pieces of the full story. And then there is a third group, the exhausted viewers. These are the people who arrive simply seeking escapist renovation content and now find themselves decoding property disputes, shifting loyalties, and cryptic comment section exchanges as though they are observing a minor aristocratic succession crisis unfolding in real time. That may ultimately be what makes this entire saga so compelling. It exposes a reality many viewers rarely consider. Beneath the cozy visuals, candlelit dinners, antique furniture, and romantic restoration aesthetics lies something much more volatile, a world built on labor, ownership, financial dependency, emotional alliances, and fragile interpersonal dynamics. The chateau may look timeless on camera, but behind the scenes it is held together by people, and people, unlike stone walls, can fracture without warning. The dream of restoring a forgotten building is far more fragile than it first appears. From the outside, these projects seem to depend on stone walls, timber beams, and financial investment. But in reality, they survive on something far less visible and far more delicate: trust. The moment that trust fractures, the narrative holding everything together does not simply weaken, it collapses. Yanis' journey has become the clearest example of that fragility. His rise was one of the Chateau world's most compelling subplots, the hard-working outsider slowly proving himself through persistence, humility, and visible effort. Audiences watched him evolve from a background helper into a capable craftsman, and in doing so, they projected onto him their own fantasies of reinvention and second chances. But the fallout surrounding the convent in Château de la Base has transformed his story into something far more sobering. It has exposed the precarious position of the apprentice figure within these tightly intertwined creative ecosystems. No matter how beloved or hardworking someone becomes, their place can disappear almost overnight once the underlying power structures shift. Access, authority, and belonging are often far more conditional than viewers realize. One day, Yanis was helping build the dream. The next, he was locked out of it. And yet, against all expectations, he managed to survive the collapse with remarkable resilience. By aligning himself with Gwen, Yanis secured the two things absolutely essential for survival in the Chateauverse: a project to continue building, and a platform from which to tell the story. That decision may have saved his channel. What makes his response particularly striking is the way he chose to frame it. Rather than centering his return around bitterness, accusations, or public conflict, Giannis presented it as a continuation of the work itself. His focus remained on renovation, progress, and momentum. It was a subtle but intelligent strategy. Whether instinctively or deliberately, he seemed to understand that audiences attach themselves not just to personalities, but to narrative continuity. As long as the work continued, walls repaired, rooms transformed, projects moving forward, many viewers would continue following the journey alongside him. The cottage renovation became more than just another project. It became a lifeline. By staying productive and redirecting the narrative toward rebuilding rather than retaliation, Giannis preserved the forward motion necessary to keep both his audience and his identity intact. But while he may have adapted successfully as an individual, the Shadowverse itself has been permanently altered. This was never merely a disagreement between collaborators. It was a structural rupture that forced every central figure within the ecosystem into new alignments and loyalties. Relationships that once appeared inseparable fractured under pressure, and the collaborative dream that defined the convent era dissolved almost overnight. Yanis, perhaps reluctantly, has now become one of the defining faces of that fracture. The landscape today is starkly different from the one audiences originally fell in love with. Yanis now operates firmly within Gwen's orbit, rebuilding his brand around her support and resources. Meanwhile, Billy Petherick and the broader Petherick presence have effectively vanished from the convent and Château de la Basse narrative entirely, leaving behind an unmistakable vacuum where a collaborative creative family once existed. And perhaps the most haunting aspect of all is the physical residue left behind, the unfinished rooms, the interrupted renovations, the abandoned plans. These spaces now feel less like incomplete projects and more like monuments to a collapsed social architecture. The buildings themselves have become visual reminders of relationships that no longer function the way they once did. For longtime viewers, this represents something deeper than ordinary online drama. It is the collapse of emotional continuity. The cozy, interconnected world they spent years investing in, the friendships, routines, traditions, and collaborative spirit they believed were stable, has been revealed to be conditional, fragile, and vulnerable to the same tensions that destabilize any human system. And within that wreckage, Giannis has undergone his most profound transformation yet. He is no longer simply the humble helper in the background. He is no longer just the eager apprentice learning the craft. He has emerged as one of the defining figures of the Shadowverse's most dramatic chapter, a survivor standing among the ruins of a collapsed narrative, quietly picking up his tools and attempting to build something new